Welcome to This Feels Familiar. I'm your host, Minaa B. I'm a therapist, author, and creator of the Siblinghood Theory, and this show explores the themes of belonging, conflict, and the relational patterns shaping your life. Let's dive in. Today, we're talking about something that so many people are experiencing, but not always naming clearly, and that is situationships. It's all over the internet. And even if you're not online, I'm quite sure you probably know what a situationship is, and maybe you have been in one. You know the dynamic. You're emotionally connected to the person. You spend time together. There's intimacy, there's vulnerability, but there's no clear commitment, no shared direction or definition of the relationship. It's really somewhere in between, and you're trying to navigate what that in between is. And if you're in one right now, you probably already know that explaining it to other people can feel complicated, and sometimes it can even bring up shame. Because technically you're not in a relationship, but emotionally it often feels like you are. Now, before we go any further, I do want to say something very important. This episode is not about shaming people for being in situationships. There's a lot of commentary online that frames situationships as something people stay in because they lack self respect or boundaries or standards. But as a therapist, I don't see it that way. And that's why I really wanted to record this episode so that we can really have an honest conversation about why people engage in situationships. And if you want to get out of one, what you can do. What I see when I am helping people navigate the situationships that they're in is that they feel very real emotional needs, connection, intimacy, belonging, and trying to balance those needs with the reality of a dynamic that isn't giving them everything they want. And that is complicated. Situationships exist at the intersection of two powerful human needs, and that is the need for belonging and the need for relational security. And when those two needs conflict with each other, people often get stuck in the middle. So, what is a situationship? It is typically defined as a romantic or sexual relationship without clear commitment, expectations, or long term direction. However, there's connection, but there's also ambiguity. Research on modern dating patterns shows that ambiguity has become more common in relationships, particularly in the context of dating apps and shifting cultural norms around commitment. Now, if you are single right now, and you're hearing this and you're also on dating apps, you're probably nodding your head and maybe you have experienced that sense of ambiguity when you match with someone and it's like they want to meet with you, but they're also being very unclear. They're acting unavailable, but at the same time, they're making it seem like they want a connection with you. And sometimes people are very straightforward with what they're looking for. They want the emotional connection, they want the intimacy, but they don't want the commitment. And so, in other words, people are increasingly engaging in relational dynamics where the emotional connection is real, but the structure is unclear. And that ambiguity can create a lot of psychological tension because humans are wired for connection, but we're also wired for predictability and security. So, when a relationship provides connection but not security, the nervous system often stays activated because you're trying to interpret what does this relationship mean? Where is it even going? And how much do I actually matter to this person? Because that's also very important for some of our emotional needs to know that we matter to people, especially if they matter to us. And I think it's important to really unpack why situationships can feel so powerful. And it's because they're incredibly meaningful. And that's often because they provide genuine emotional intimacy for some people, which is why so many people are in them. You might share personal stories with the person. You might find support in each other through difficult times. You might even feel deeply understood by this person and maybe misunderstood by everybody else in your life at the moment. But the missing piece is the commitment. It is the clarity that this relationship has a future and that both people are invested in building it. And I want to be clear here, if you're content with being in your situationship, then that's totally fine. This episode is really geared toward people who are struggling with that ambiguity. And maybe you're in one and you're trying to get out of it, or you're in one and you're confused. How did I end up here? I would have never thought that I'd be in this situation, but here you are. And so I hope this episode and this information really resonates with you to provide you with clarity. Or maybe you know someone who's in a situationship and you're just like, I don't understand why my friend is putting themselves in that situation. Understand that many people are looking for intimacy. They're looking for certain emotional needs to be met. And sometimes the situationship does serve that purpose, but they also need some guidance and support on how to get out of that situationship if they feel the situationship is hurting them. And I think one of the things that comes to that missing piece related to commitment is that there is a gap between intimacy and commitment. And that is where many people experience emotional confusion around situationships because the connection feels real, but the structure doesn't match the depth of the connection. And that disconnect can make it very difficult to walk away. So, why do people stay? If you know what this is, and if you know it's not what you want, then why is it so hard to leave? First, let me be clear. It's not because you're weak. It's not because you don't love yourself. It's not because you're desperate or pathetic or any of the other things you might be telling yourself or literally what you've been reading on social media. You're staying because this dynamic is meeting needs that are very real, period. That's what's happening to you. It doesn't take math. It doesn't require a science experiment. You're staying because this dynamic is meeting needs that are very real. And walking away means losing something that matters, even if what you're losing is hurting you or isn't enough. Also, you're staying because having some connection feels better than none. Humans are wired for belonging. We need connection. And even limited connection, such as a situationship that's not going where you want, can feel better than being completely alone. Your nervous system would rather have partial belonging than risk total isolation. So even though you know this person isn't giving you what you deserve or what you want, they're giving you something. And that something feels safer than nothing. Also, you're staying because leaving would mean confronting conflict. Most people in situationships avoid the conversation. You don't want to be the one to bring up commitment because you already know the answer. You don't want to end it because ending it would require a difficult and painful conversation. It would mean asserting a boundary that results in loss. And if you learned early on that conflict leads to rupture, that pattern can be playing out here. It's easier to stay in the ambiguity than to initiate the rupture itself, especially when it's going to bring pain to you and the other party. Another reason for why you're staying is because, let's be real, relationships are feeling very scarce for a lot of people right now. This connects to what we talked about in my previous episode regarding the single tax and the pressure to couple up. I believe the episode is episode 65, where I talk about the fear that if you let go of someone, you won't find someone else. And even though this isn't what you want, it feels like it's better than starting over, better than going back to being single, better than being back on the apps. The app that you were like, once I match with this person and we go on a few awkward first dates, I'm deleting this thing. I am done. And now you're like, nah, I got to go back on the app though. You're like, no, absolutely not. I am not trying to do that. You don't want to go back to the thing that was already difficult for you in the first place. And so you stay in the ambiguity. Another thing is recognizing that scarcity thinking tells you this is the best you can do right now. So just hold on to it. Because if it took you 15 swipes to get here and this is how it landed for you, or you've been chronically single for years, sometimes you start to tell yourself that it's not going to work for me. Maybe relationships are not meant for me. Maybe commitment is not meant for me. Maybe nobody wants to commit to me, and maybe it's a me issue. Maybe I'm not pretty enough. Maybe I'm not handsome enough. Maybe I'm not good enough or smart enough, and I might as well just take what I'm being given. Sometimes that is also the thought process. Another reason why you're staying is because you're getting emotional safety even without commitment. And this is huge. For some people, the situationship provides genuine emotional intimacy. You can be vulnerable with this person. You feel seen and understood. That kind of safety is rare to you. And the idea of losing it, even if the relationship isn't moving forward, feels like losing something irreplaceable. You're not staying for potential. You're staying for what you actually have, because what you have meets a deep need for connection, intimacy, and understanding. Now, here's one more thing that you need to pay attention to. You're staying because familiar discomfort is easier than uncertain possibility. Even though the situationship is unsatisfying, it's predictable. You know the pattern. You know how this person operates. You know what to expect because there's already boundaries established and parameters and rules and guidelines on how you guys operate with one another. And so your brain prefers predictability, even when it's painful, over the uncertainty of something new. Starting over means not knowing what comes next. And that unknown feels more threatening than the known disappointment you're already living. So now that you understand why you stay, let's reframe what's happening here. You're not stuck in a situationship because you're broken or you don't know your worth. You're stuck because you're navigating competing needs: the need for connection versus the need for commitment, the need for emotional safety versus the need for a relationship that's actually going somewhere, the need to avoid being alone versus the need to hold out for what you actually want, no matter how long it takes. And those needs are in conflict. So you stay in the middle, accepting partial fulfillment of one need while ignoring the other. You get the connection, but not the commitment. You get the intimacy, but not the security. You get the companionship, but not the future. And you see where I'm going here. This is all about belonging and conflict, because two opposing truths can happen at once. And I talk about this often in my work. Your early experiences with siblings and peers, for example, taught you how to navigate belonging and what happens when you assert your needs. And those patterns can show up in your situationship. If you learned that belonging is conditional, that you have to accept less than you want to maintain connection, you're repeating that pattern in this situationship. You're settling for partial belonging because full belonging feels unavailable or too risky to ask for. If you learned that conflict leads to loss, that expressing your needs mean people leave, you're avoiding the conversation that would end this. You'd rather stay in the gray area than risk the rupture that comes with asserting what you actually want. And if you learn that relationships are scarce, that there's limited love, limited partnership, limited connection to go around, you're holding on to this situationship because letting go feels like losing your only option. But here is something I want you to pause and reflect on. You're not stuck because something is wrong with you. You're stuck because this dynamic feels safer than the alternative. And until the alternative, which is being alone, starting over, risking rejection from someone new, feels less threatening than staying, you'll stay. And there's no judgment in that. You'll leave when you're ready. As I said earlier, the goal of this episode isn't to shame you into leaving. It's to help you see what's keeping you there, so when you are ready, you know what you're actually choosing and how. So, quick pause. If this conversation is helping you understand your own situation more clearly, please subscribe to the show and leave a review. It helps more people find these episodes, and it also helps me grow. And if you know someone who's navigating a situationship and feeling stuck and you don't know what to do to support them, share this episode with them. Sometimes just knowing it's not about the weakness makes all the difference. And this episode can help them get the strategies that they need to make the choices that they feel they need to make. Now, let's move on. If you're ready to start thinking about leaving, or even if you're not quite there yet, but want to understand what it would take, here are some things that can help. First, get honest about what you're sacrificing. You know what you're getting from this situationship, which is connection, intimacy, and even companionship. But what are you giving up to stay? That's the big question. The ability to date other people who might actually commit, the emotional energy you're spending on someone who's not available, the opportunity to build something real with someone who wants the same things you do. Those are some things that you might be giving up. So write it down if you need to, because sometimes seeing what you're sacrificing makes it harder to ignore. The next thing is stop waiting for them to change the dynamic, especially if you've been in this dynamic for years. They're not going to suddenly decide they want a relationship with you. And if they do, it may not be because you were patient enough or understanding enough or gave them enough space. If someone wants to commit to you, they will. And if they don't, no amount of waiting will change that, especially if you are in limbo and in ambiguity. Accepting this doesn't mean you have to leave right now, but it does mean you have to stop living in false hope. Next, I want you to notice how this is affecting the rest of your life. Is this situationship making you anxious, for example? Are you constantly checking your phone for when they call you, analyzing their text messages, wondering when you'll see them again? Are you avoiding other opportunities because you're emotionally unavailable since you're tied up in your situationship? Are you even lying to your friends about what this is because you're embarrassed? Maybe people don't even know, so you're navigating this all alone. So pay attention to how much energy this is taking from you, because that is data and information, and the quality of our relationships will impact our mental health. So if this situationship is actually leaving you drained, tired, feeling less than, feeling less confident, your self esteem is decreasing over time, that's data. So write it down and pay attention to it. The next thing that you will probably have to do is grieve what you're going to lose before you leave. One reason people stay is because they're not ready to grieve, and grief is real. So we do everything that we can to avoid the grief. You're going to lose the intimacy, the safety, the connection. Even if it wasn't enough, it was something that you had, and it was something that made you feel good. So give yourself permission to mourn that before you walk away. You don't have to pretend it didn't matter just because it wasn't a real relationship. It mattered to you, and losing it will hurt. And that's also okay. You're going to have to grieve that. I also encourage you to get support. Talk to someone who can hold space for the complexity, a therapist, a friend who actually gets it and understands and won't judge you. Someone who won't just tell you to leave, but will help you process what's keeping you stuck. This isn't something that you have to figure out alone. I also encourage you to build a life that doesn't center this person. So start reinvesting in yourself. Reconnect with friends, pick up hobbies you've been neglecting, make plans that don't involve them, decrease the amount of time that you spend with them. The more your life expands beyond the situationship, the less devastating it will feel to let it go. You're not leaving them for nothing. Think about it as you're leaving them to make space for a life that actually fits what you want. Now, also, when you're ready to leave, be clear about your decision. If you've been in this situationship for months or years, it makes sense to have a conversation. It makes sense to have a conversation about why you're ending it. You can explain how you feel, what you need, why this isn't working anymore. There's really nothing wrong with doing that. The goal isn't to avoid the conversation, it's to go into it with clarity about your decision and not let them talk you out of it. So understand that this conversation is not you asking for permission or trying to convince them. You're informing them of a choice you've already made. Have the conversation if you need to, but don't let it turn into a negotiation. You're not looking for them to change your mind or promise they'll be different. You are literally closing this chapter, and this is your form of closure, and this is how you are making the choice to move on. Now, as I said, prepare for the grief and the doubt. After you leave, you're going to miss them. That is completely normal. You're going to question whether you made the right choice. You're probably going to feel lonely. None of that information means that you should go back to it. That information means you're grieving and grief is uncomfortable. So sit with it and make sure you let yourself feel it. If you have to, reach out to people for support, but don't use the discomfort as evidence that you made a mistake. And don't use that as evidence that you should go back. It is totally normal to miss someone, but missing someone does not mean that we should allow them back into our lives. So, as I said earlier, remember that you're navigating competing needs when you're in a situationship. The need for connection and the fear of being alone, the need for commitment and the comfort of what's familiar. And until one need outweighs the other, you'll stay in the middle. You'll leave when you're ready. And being ready doesn't mean you won't grieve. It doesn't mean it won't hurt. It means you've reached the point where staying hurts more than leaving, where the cost of accepting less than what you want is higher than the fear of starting over. So there's no shame in where you are right now, but there's also freedom in recognizing what you're choosing and why. Because once you see it clearly, you can start to choose differently when you're ready. So if this episode resonated with you, please rate and subscribe to the show. It helps more people find these conversations. You can also subscribe to my newsletter, All the Hard Things, on Substack, where I go deeper into these topics. And if you are based in New York State and you are looking for a therapist, head to the show description where you can book a 15-minute consultation with me for free so that I can learn more about your needs and we can see if we're a good fit for one another. Also, if you haven't, you can grab a copy of my book, Owning Our Struggles, wherever books are sold. If that familiar feeling of being stuck in something you know isn't right for you is something you're navigating, here's what I want you to remember from today's episode. You're not stuck because you're weak. You're stuck because what you have meets real needs. And walking away means losing something that matters to you. So when you're ready to choose differently, you will. Until next time.